Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Day, here to talk about what the goings on in the country of Afghanistan right now, and some of the sad occurrences that are happening to people, and his sad and historic occurrences both that are happening to people from the U.S. embassy that are fleeing the country. The president of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, has fled the presidential palace in Afghanistan in lieu of the Taliban's takeover of the country. Um, we've been there for 20 years, and this war is finally over. We've been there since 2001. It'll be 21 years coming up this September since the attacks of 9/11. And it is bittersweet with regards to that because we have been there for so long and we were there for very long to capture Osama bin Laden. But one of the things that my friend and co host Lisa said to me that I think was spot on when it came to this was that we were there to capture bin Laden, and we captured bin Laden. He was the culprit behind 9/11, and the Taliban in Afghanistan was hiding him and abetting him in Abbottabad. And so was the Pakistani government, by the way, because he was on the Pakistani side of the border. And they were supposed to be our allies. Meanwhile, they were aiding and abetting him for 10 years. But we continued to stay there and continue to stay there, continue to build more and more resentment with the people of Afghanistan who kind of felt as though our presence there was no longer wanted nor needed. And it built a lot of resentment up for us from there. I mean, it's not like they had any love for the West, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, or any other country to begin with. I mean, being fundamentalist, being religious fundamentalists, and being Muslim, they wouldn't. So it wasn't like we would be welcomed as liberators, as George W. Bush said we would. I'm sure for some people, for some of the Afghan people that are more Western minded, more liberal minded, especially for the women, it did come as a relief. But for many of them, especially the year they had to endure, that the entire world had to endure in 2020, and to deal with the belligerence of and the weakness of the U.S. backed coalition. Of course, that U.S. backed coalition was seen as imperialistic and as aggressive. So, of course, they wasn't going to respond to us, like they were our best buddies to begin with, and us staying there for a number for 20 plus years only added to the resentment that they had towards us. The fact of the matter is that whether we like it or not, uh, people don't want a country. I mean, another country, a foreign country, to occupy their land in perpetuity. You know, potentially forever. Because come on, we wouldn't want that. We wouldn't want that if it were the shoe were on the other foot. In fact, in history, when we were never conquered as Americans, we were never conquered. Our land was never occupied by a foreign entity. But if it ever were, I'm sure we would respond the same way. People yearn for self determination, and of course, that self determination doesn't always um, include the entire populace. You know, there are religious minorities, um, sectarian minorities like the Hazara people that I'm sure they wouldn't be happy with the Taliban, which is a primarily Sunni Pashtun faction of Afghan people taking power. I mean, let's just be honest. You know what I mean? So there's still going to be sectarian violence. There's still going to be people that aren't Muslims, that aren't even Muslims at all, that are going to be dissatisfied with this, such as the one. I read an article that now that Kabul fell, there's like one Jewish guy left in the entire in the entire country in a synagogue that is not currently occupied. And I'm sure there are a few um, Christian people there as well that are not going to be happy with this, and other probably heretical groups. But unfortunately, as is the case with a lot of countries, and we spoke about this on my channel, with regards to Libya, with regards to Syria, and with regards to even Iraq, um, when the U.S. comes in and they overthrow a regime that has a lot of order and stability, people respond to order and stability more than they respond to chaos and uncertainty. So a lot of times, in chaotic times like what we saw last year, not only do people not respond to imperialistic and foreign rule, but they also don't really respond well to chaos and insecurity. So a lot of times people will give in to these autocratic, oppressive regimes like the Taliban that subscribe to Salafi Islam, an extremist branch of Islam, because they feel insecure. They feel like back in the day, like in the 90s, when the Taliban did take power in Afghanistan, it was more secure. They felt that their life was more safer under the Taliban's strict rules than it is right now. Because these governments, like Ashraf Ghani's government or Hamad Karzai's government, the previous president, these puppet governments that the United States puts in power, these puppet regimes, these regimes, they often don't serve the, the greater extent of the people. They serve the people in power. They serve the overseas rulers that try to take control of them, but they don't serve the Afghan people. And one thing about Afghanistan, because of its geography and its landscape, it's never been a place in history that people can conquer easily. Afghanistan has always been a place that um, is not easy to conquer. But for the Taliban, it seems both in 1996 and now, they seem to be able to conquer it pretty well. Because like I said, most of them belong to the Pashtun ethnic group, and I have a very strong familiarity with the geography of the land. And mountainous areas, even here in the United States, like the Rocky Mountains or the Appalachians, those kind of people tend to be very traditionalist, very isolated from urban, more educated liberal classes in society, and we tend to be way more militant. We see it here in the States, we see it everywhere. Wherever there's mountains, it's easier to rebel and it's easier to engage in guerrilla warfare. Throughout history, we saw that the Asian Revolution, the Cuban Revolution in 1959, Appalachian people have been, even in the States, like I said here, the Appalachian people are virtually unconquerable. They're not going to do what you want. They're not going to bend to your will. They didn't bend to the United States government's will during Prohibition, and most of them probably wouldn't bend to the government's will now, especially with Biden in power. So Afghanistan is kind of the same thing. Historically, a lot of global powers, Britain in the late 19th century tried to conquer it. Russia tried to conquer it in the 1980s. They were unable to, and because of U.S. backed support against the communists, they defeated the communists, and it was the United States that armed um, the Islamic Mujahideens, which eventually became the seeds of the Taliban. The Taliban directly was formed in Pakistan. That's what's interesting because Pakistan, like I said, during the war on terror in the early 2000s, Pakistan was positioned as an ally of the United States. But meanwhile, the Taliban itself comes from Pakistan, and uh, many, many of the hardest supporters of the Taliban's political philosophy come from the Peshawar region in Pakistan. you know, so even though they are Afghan and Pashtun in origin, they come from Pakistan. But indirectly, the seeds of the seeds of the Islamic Mujahideen come from Pakistan. From uh, the U.S. resistance against the Soviet Union in the 1980s. So it was kind of like we armed our own enemy in a sense that eventually came to dominate us. And Osama bin Laden was um, one of those Arab mujahideen that went through to Afghanistan in a non-Arab country and fought against the Soviet Union. Then he eventually came to fight against the United States. So, so that's the long and short of it. Um, I can't say I feel sorry for anything that happened. If anything, I feel sorry for um, the, some of the women that were educated. Like um, a good book to read on this is Malia Yousafzai's book, "The Girl in the Tangerine Scarf," I believe it is, on the treatment of women and girls in Afghanistan. That, to me, is the only thing that I really am trepidatious about. As you guys know, here on my channel, I focus a lot on the health and wealth and wellness and representation of women and girls. And I think, or I believe, based on the past anyway, based on how they ruled the country in the 90s, that Afghanistan um, will not be keen on women's rights and will not be keen on the education and health and wellness of women and girls. And that's really the only downside. I don't cry and I don't mourn for the rich multinational corporations that got rich off the war, that engaged in the opium trade and the control of the poppy seeds in Afghanistan long after it was necessary. Um, for the soldiers that lost lives in trying to fight this war. I thank them, and that's just about it, guys. Anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit the bell button to see when my next video is coming out. Peace. Love you.